Welcome to the South by East podcast, where we discuss culture, the scriptures, and everything in between and how they impact Southeast Topeka with your co-hosts, Jonathan Sublett and Braille Watson.
All right. Yes, sir.
Welcome, Southeast Topeka family, to episode number 1 of the South by East podcast. And I am Jonathan Sublett.
And I am Braille Watson.
Yeah, and we are your co-hosts for the South by East podcast. And hey, today in our inaugural podcast episode, we're looking at Kendrick Lamar's latest album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. And so this is important to what we do, because we say that this podcast covers everything from faith to culture to religion, to relevant topics of our day and everything in between. And so it kind of felt right to dive into something that really, I remember when you sent me the first video.
The Heart Part 5.
Yes.
The Heart Part 5.
And just sending me that, and like how that was just taking over YouTube. And how it was just going in, and people were just like sharing it astronomically. And we were trying to discuss, like, what is it? And as we even discussed, like, man, what are people gravitating to? And truthfully, I got to be honest with you. I'm a latecomer to the whole Kendrick Lamar game, and there's reasons behind that, and I think that this fits what we do. And so,
and kind of looking at even looking at that, one of the reasons that I shared it, with you, is because this was a big moment for culture. Like, this was a big moment for culture. So the Heart Part 5 drops. To give y'all some context, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers is Kendrick Lamar, one of the largest hip-hop artists in the world, part of the hip-hop top 3, J. Cole, Drake, and Kendrick. And this is his 5th full-length studio album and his final album on his record label, TDE, that Kendrick Lamar actually was the flagship artist for. So this is the end of an era in hip-hop.
Yeah. Not
to mention Kendrick's last album, which won him a Pulitzer Prize, dropped in 2017. This is 5 years,
5 years
after his last album. And so we have kind of one of the gods of hip hop to consider, one of the gods of hip hop, who's pretty much been lying dormant for 5 straight years. We've heard nothing from him. He puts up a tweet that breaks the internet and talking about, hey, I'm coming out, all praises to the Most High, we're gonna keep it going, I'm getting off of TDE. Then he drops this deep fake music video that everybody's like, whoa, he killed this. It's all about relevant topics. And then he drops this album that doesn't even have that song on it. And so, like, this was just such a huge moment in culture, and I felt like this was something that we could not miss.
But I think it feeds more into this. And here's the deal. As a part, like I said, I'm new to the Kendrick Lamar game. And the only reason I was even willing to listen to his music was because you recommended it to me. You said there's something more there. And I think that feeds into this. In life, and just where we live at in Southeast Topeka, sometimes you need to lean on the credibility of someone else in order to take another step, in order for something to happen. And so, and that's so important, because as we look at this, someone might say, well, y'all guys are both pastors and you're leading this podcast. What in the world are you doing listening to Kendrick Lamar, first of all?
Right.
Second of all, why would you start a podcast with a topic like this? And so that leans into a couple things. And it leans into a couple things in this. First of all, I remember some of the problems that someone won't have is just a warning. I listened. There's a quote unquote clean version of the album out there, which
it's not worth it.
It's still not clean. That's the version I've been listening to. It's still not clean. So hey, parents, you do need to exercise some discretion with your kids and different things. I'm not telling you to listen to this in the car with your kids and different things. Like, no, I'm not doing that. And then also as a part of this, right? So you need to do that, and so it's some vulgarity and different things of that nature, and so that raised some problems. Should pastors listen to music? Should Christians listen to music with vulgarity or talk about certain things? And here's where I landed. One,
Yeah.
I've gotten to do quite a bit of travel around the world, and one of the things that I have grown to love is to go visit museums. Actually,
Okay.
when I travel,
Okay.
I've gone to the Louvre in Paris
Ooh, I have also been to the Louvre.
and
Very nice.
and
Yes.
and got to see Mona Lisa and all these different
Yeah.
items around there. And you know that not everything is covered up
Yeah.
when you go to these museums.
No.
Like there's just I've gotten to go to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam and some of the other famous museums around the world. And you're always determining and looking at art and knowing that if I was a little elementary kid, I remember we go to museums, I would laugh and giggle at different things of that nature, right?
Yeah.
Even the skeleton in the science room would cause us
Kiki, do you
yeah,
love me? You're right. Right.
to giggle.
Yeah.
And my science teacher would be like, hey, there's no veins on this skeleton. These are just bones.
Right.
And so remembering that and taking that in. But then several years ago, I remember there was this big debate, and I think it went up to the Supreme Court where they debated what turns an image into porn. And the justice said the person knows in their heart, and when something becomes no longer art
Interesting.
but turns into porn, right? And here's the deal: almost no one sees a lady who's on a painting in a museum um, as porn when she doesn't have clothes on. They see it as art.
Right.
But Christians often have a problem listening to an album or viewing a movie and doing the same.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a firm believer that we should intake our art and media in community. And anything that we don't feel like we can intake in community, then that should tell us that something is wrong with it, that we may shouldn't do it.
Right.
I believe there is a line between art and vulgarity.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's just some things, even in Kendrick Lamar's music, that I feel like is just vulgarity for vulgarity's sake.
Yeah,
That
I
it could
agree.
have
Yeah,
stood
I
without
agree.
it. But even in that first album, what was it? Good
Good Kid,
Kid,
Mad City.
Mad City. I was like, man, I remember I tried to start. Somebody else referred it to me. I tried to start it, and I immediately turned it off.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And then you said, no, continue listening. There's some more. And then I got to this track where they shared the gospel
Yep.
in the middle of this hip hop album.
Yep.
And I was like, oh. And I think the same thing happens. For those of us who are Christians, sometimes, let me go here. As an African American male in this country, I have often entered into spaces to be an agent of reconciliation or conciliation because we've never got it right the first time along racial lines. And people will say, yes, we want you to help do this, John. We want you to be a part of this. But then they want me to package it in a way that they want it that's nice and consumable for them that swallows easy.
Yeah.
And I said, that's not the way that this happens. And I'm like, that's why we're not moving anywhere on this topic.
Yeah.
Is because you say that you want your neighborhood to change, but you're making everyone who comes to you for help with their next step package it in a way that's nice for you.
Yeah, yeah. You don't really want change. You want conformity.
Yes.
It's different seat.
That's a different
It's a
seat.
different seat.
And so with this, I think we have to look at it because Kendrick's music is steady graying out this black and white line that existed
Yeah.
between art and vulgarity
Yeah.
for vulgarity's sake. And that's why I've continued listening, because with wisdom, with boundaries, I'm trying to not only exegete God's word in my career, in my calling as a pastor, but also exegete the culture and seeing what deeper conversations are being had,
Right.
what messages are being sent, and what do I need to be listening to so that I can walk with people in the most loving way. And what we're flirting with here is art that the evangelical community may call vulgarity, but what culture sees as art. who's right? I'm uncertain.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna tell you that I'm uncertain.
Yeah. And I think there's another big C here that I think we have to address, and that's context.
Yes.
And so I don't want to give people the scapegoat of like, man, I can do anything in moderation, and that all morality goes out the window if you just put it in the right context. No, I do think that there's still a line. There's still a line that can be
Yes.
drawn where right and wrong can exist, and that there can be some exceptionality, and there can be some times where we look at things and we have to preserve the context in order to properly review them. For speaking of which, we're about 9 minutes in, and some of y'all are wondering when y'all gonna hit the album. So I want to make sure to give y'all this context. This is not an album review. We will be doing a part 2 of this podcast where we're going to dive a little deeper into the tracks and different things like that. But we exegete culture here. We hit, man, how does this
Yeah.
culture affect Southeast Topeka and affect those of you in Southeast Topeka? And so we're going to be talking about overall concepts around the album and things that the album has brought up conversation-wise, but we're not hitting all the songs. So if you're like, man, when they going to get to my favorite track, this may not be today, but definitely jump back in for part 2. Now, back on what I was saying on context, though. You when you brought up something about talking about like man, you might not necessarily want be listening to this with your kids. Almost everything that I listen to, after I've heard it, I'll listen to with my kids. If I continue to listen to it, if it's something that I feel like I'm continuing to put into my body. One of my favorite artists growing up was Tech Nine, and Tech Nine is drug, sex, and rock and roll in hip hop personified, right? And so I don't listen to any Tech Nine around my kids. So I really don't listen to Tech Nine anymore.
Yeah.
Kendrick Lamar does not have a single clean album. I have found a way, once my kids hit a certain age, to listen to some Kendrick around my kids.
That's key.
And when I listen to Kendrick around my kids, I do listen to the edited versions, and I actually use it to broach topics that I want to bring up with them, because I know, man, this is the hot new album out. My kids are 12 years old and in middle school. Most of their friends are listening to this album. I want to give them the context for this album first before they get it elsewhere.
Bro, that's so key. And here's the deal. Like, bro, your kids, we're at different stages in parenting.
Right.
Well, you got some littles younger than mine, but you also have 2 daughters that, like you said, are 12.
Yeah.
And we both have twins. I have 7, 7, 5, soon to be 6. And so I'm at different stages, but we were just on vacation, and we were at my wife's aunt's house, and she had an Alexa. And like you said, I'm not around my kids 24/7. They're away
Right.
from me or different things of that nature. And when they found out she had an Alexa, they just started calling out, Alexa, play this, play that. Stuff that I didn't even know. At one point, forgot about Dre came on. And I was like, what? Whoa.
What's happening?
And then at one point, they said I hate your face or something like that. And a song started playing. We were like, whoa, Alexa, stop.
Stop.
And so even my kids go to a Christian school. They they're young, but they're still being exposed to stuff that I don't even know about.
Yep.
That people at their school, and they come home singing. I'm like, where'd you hear that at? And so one of the things I think we do a disservice is by thinking like you cannot bubble wrap your kids from getting hurt physically or from being exposed to culture.
Nope.
What you can do is intelligently and wisely introduce them in a way that gives them critical thinking skills.
Yes.
In order to approach topics
Yep.
in art forms with wisdom and maturity.
Yeah.
And I think that's just wise. And here's the deal. I believe it's upon every parent, though, to decide what that looks like for their child and their family in their context.
Sure, in their context.
And I wouldn't ever push a family to make a decision at a certain time because that's when I choose for my family to do it.
So like in giving some of that reference, right? So I'm a secular hip hop artist. I choose to work within the secular space because I believe that that's where God has called me to be.
Yeah.
So I keep up with hip hop, for one, just for business. Like I need to know what's going on. For two, if I want to ever make secular music with a sacred message, right? If I ever want to put the gospel in the culture, then I have to know what is
Yeah.
happening in the culture. Whenever Paul gave an apologetic, Paul would utilize things within the culture. Even as Jesus gave biblical, spiritual principles within Scripture, he spoke in parables. He understood the culture in which he was in and used that culture to help people understand more about God. And so, if for those of us who are believers, I know not all of us are, but for those of us who are believers, we do have some responsibility to know what is happening in the world and how God relates to it, because we exist in this world and we should be reaching people within this world, and we can't reach people that we never see or that we never come across or that we never interact with. So that's the first thing.
Yeah, but bro, on that tip, Paul was a traveling evangelistic church planner.
Right,
One
right.
of the things that made Paul so efficient and so effective was that he had this tremendous grasp of the culture from where he grew up at. It was because it was a kind of hub
Mm-hmm.
and a cultural intersection point. And so, although he lived according to a certain custom, he was exposed to everything. And so, when he went and traveled, like there's one passage in Acts where he went in and he's like, that statue to an unknown God. I know
Exactly.
the unknown
I know the
God.
God. I
And
know the
so, but
God.
he knew that the statue existed. He knew that there was a reference there, and that would make a mark and hold some weight in that culture. And a lot of times, we're ineffective in what we do is because we go with illustrations that mean nothing to the people that we're trying to communicate with, and it's
Right.
because we have failed to exegete the culture. We have failed to engage with the culture, and that's sad because a lot of it is out of fear.
Yeah.
And my deal is like the scriptures say, "He that is in you is stronger than he that is in the world." And we're supposed to be thermostats and not thermometers, but often
Right.
we're afraid of being changed,
Mm-hmm.
and rather than being changed agents and catalysts.
Yeah.
And so that's just yeah,
Yeah, and I think that kind of leads into something. So, um, there's this concept that I was actually talking about with somebody earlier today, and we were talking about general revelation. And if the general revelation, that means just that God has revealed himself within the natural world, that we see parts of God everywhere. But often we lean more towards the idea of total depravity, that everything in the world is just jacked up and wrong. And when we become Christians, we become aliens and we're no longer human beings, and all things that exist with human beings should just be gone and just be turned with no TV, no radio, no nothing. And when we do and when we do that, because we do that, that's one of those reasons that we steer away from what's actually happening in the world, in the ideas that are coming out of the world. But if general revelation is real, then my man Alex just said this today when we were at lunch. He said nobody is 100% wrong 100% of the time. And if God has revealed himself through mankind, then there is some bit of truth in everything that's coming out and coming around. And so, like in Good Kid, Mad City, I found the truth in there. I'm like, this whole album is about people finding the gospel. And in this album, you see Kendrick bringing in lots of pieces of the truth that I think are important to point out to people who
yes.
may be listening to them, but may not be able to understand or discern between, okay, what of this is going to help me grow in my relationship with Christ? What of this is actually going to lead me to confusion? And I think it's important that we address that.
Yeah, and here's the deal. I'm gonna give you a little tip of the cap to something I say in a sermon.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the problems that ties into this and what you just said is in one of Kanye West's songs, he said that Obama said I was a abomination of a nation. That's a pretty bad way to start a conversation.
Yeah.
And when we characterize a certain group in a certain way, it's really hard to overcome that and have meaningful interactions and conversations with that group.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we have to forget, one of the things that gets us out of the ruts and gets us to be more enchanted with either a person to person,
Mm-hmm.
or with God, is to see the beauty that we are becoming.
Yeah.
So when it comes to
Yeah.
our relationship with God, we need people around us to speak about what God is doing in our lives and the beauty that he is creating in us and through us. When it comes to how we are fascinated and enthralled with our mates, we become more enchanted with them as they call out the good things about us. That's
Yeah,
what
yeah.
draws us and makes us more affectionate toward them.
Yeah.
And for some reason, like we have just conceived this notion that people are going to think that they're going to want to desire to be around us the more that we just call out all the bad things in our life and things that we don't like, rather than saying, here is where we see your creator in you creating beauty in your
In you.
life.
Yep.
And so that leads to,
What's in Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers?
yes.
If you have not heard this album, parental discretion is advised. But it's a 2-disc album of Kendrick in many ways kind of stepping out of a savior complex. Kendrick Lamar has been kind of dubbed like the savior of hip hop, and he stepped into that mantle in many ways. But on this album, he literally says like, I'm throwing off trying to save the culture, I'm throwing off trying to save the world. I want to pursue a relationship with my wife, with my child, and with God. And so in many ways, he breaks that down on this project, man. How did this project hit you in light of, like, what messages did you pull out of Kendrick Lamar's Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers?
Well, man, here's the deal. The pandemic wrecked the world as we know it.
Yeah.
Mental health coined a phrase of global fatigue.
Yeah.
And here's the deal. Like what I saw, they say this with pastors. Most pastors quit after a sabbatical. And the reason that is because when you're in the heat of something and you're going, often you don't have the space or the margin to think deeply about, why am I doing this? Is this beneficial to me? Or am I just going through the motions because I've been told that this is what I should do and what I think is expected of me? And once you have a room to breathe, you think differently. Yeah. The point that you brought up earlier about the 5-year hiatus between his last album and this, I feel like Kendrick had a COVID period in his career.
Yeah.
He had a space where everything was shut down, and part of it because he was made to shut down from mental health kind of deals that gave him space to think. And that first track of United in Grief, where he just repeats, I grieve different. And you grieve loss, you grieve heaviness, and one of the things, you just grieve exhaustion. And I think a lot of people in the world are grieving exhaustion right now. As a leader, I can tell you that I just don't think people are able to take on any extra duties right now. They're filled to capacity. Anything seems like too much. I don't care how small it is.
Yep.
Picking up the fry that fell in between the cushions or the cracks of your car seat seems like too much right now.
Oh, so you came over last week. Okay.
Yeah. And so I'm seeing when I heard him say this, and then the second track is N95 actually.
Yep.
It's N95 actually.
Take it off.
The mask, right? And how at the same time it protects you, it also makes you feel smothered and as if you can't breathe. And here's the deal. We all know what it feels like for other people to heap their expectations on you, and how burdensome it can feel, and how suffocating it can feel, in the place it leaves you in. And when he says, I am grieving all these things, and how sometimes, and I've seen this story of Samson, when you're tremendously gifted, people will put you in places and in positions that you're not ready for, really.
Take off the idea that if I'm rich, I'm rare. One of the lines in there, the idea that because you see me succeeding due to my talent and because of my gifting and skills, that all of a sudden that just makes me special. It's not true. Take it off.
Hey, bro. We call Michael Jackson eccentric because he was rich. We call John Mayer eccentric because he's rich.
Yeah.
Taylor Swift is eccentric because she's rich.
Right.
We would use a different phrase if they were not rich.
Right.
And so, but their gifting has put them in this place where now they're something is expected of them, rightly or wrongly,
Right.
and it becomes burdensome to now they try to fill that space. There's some people that are made for that. Like Dr. King, I went to the King Center and took some students one year to the King Center, and they had the shoes that he did a lot of marching in, and I'm like, man, those are dress shoes.
Yeah.
He wasn't marching, bro, in Brooks or Nikes, bro, walking shoes.
Yeah. Yeah, them penny loafers.
Bro, you gotta be made for that.
Yeah.
Like everybody can't feel that, and when you have to when you're forced into this position to try to carry something, and then you say, well, let me grow into this because everybody's thinking I'm supposed to do it, so I guess I am supposed to do it. Yeah. So he tries to become this person that he's not, and then he recognizes how he keeps falling short, and all it does is defeat him over and over again. And instead of finding what God has already called out in him and saying, you be the best version of that, and you're still going to service and be a gift and a benefit to society and all those around you, often we try to force people into the molds that we think they should carry. And I can see him just talking about that. Now, like one of my favorite tracks on the deal that it's hard for me not to get in the feels when I hit Die Hard.
Die Hard.
Yeah. And
man, before you kind of go that route, one at a different perspective for N95. Not only are the masks these things that can suffocate us and cover us and that are heaped upon us and forced upon us, I think they also become things that eventually we accept and they hide us. They cover us. And so because they cover us, even though like, man, this is actually hurting me. This is making it harder for me to breathe. This is making it hard for me to go on. But if I take this off, I don't know if I can actually handle this environment. And so we cover them up. I actually asked one of my students the other day, I was like, hey, for one, I spend one full day a week in the schools and in the middle school at that. And most of the kids in the middle school still wear masks. And I was like, hey, why are y'all still wearing your mask? I asked my daughters, I'm like, why y'all still wearing your mask? Like, I'm just more comfortable like that. And I asked one of my high school kids that came through, I was like, why do you still wear your mask? And he was like, because I don't want people to see my face.
So, bro,
I'd rather be covered.
That's scripture. The scriptures talk about Old Testament, how Moses would go up and spend time with God. And from being in the presence of God, he would just radiate. He would glow. Yeah. And as he left the presence of God and got around normal people and seeing just normal in his life, the glow would start to leave him. But when he would first come down, just the pure radiance of God shining on him would scare people. So Moses would start wearing the face covering.
You are the last track.
Yes, he had the glow, right?
Yes.
But then in the New Testament, it talks about how Moses would keep wearing the mask even when the glow would leave to hide that sin was infiltrating back into his presence because he had left the radiance of God. And so the mask stopped being so much for the people as it was to hide what Moses had going on in his own life. And Paul was saying, we can go unveiled. And so, man, it's the same deal. Like that mask that sometimes is burdensome becomes a safety. Like, man, that's why, like, when you're going into an event of having a cup in your hand, and it seems so simple, but it becomes something, a kind of a barrier, a crust that helps you connect because it's like a safety valve in between you and her. It creates a little bit of a barrier that if you get too awkward, you can always
exit stage left.
Yeah.
You can take a break.
Yeah, I've learned that I can make myself pee at any time, and so I've learned that, and so if I get too awkward, I just say I need to go use the restroom, and I'm not lying because I can just make myself pee.
I do gotta go.
At any time, right? And so if it gets too awkward, I can just say, hey, I need to go use the restroom.
I think one of the other things that he really addresses in this project is trauma, and how trauma affects us throughout generations and seeps into our actions. And so there are sometimes things that we're doing that we feel that we also put up as masks
Yeah.
that are actually a reflection of trauma in our lives. Um, you get a chance to listen to the project. I really, if you are in the space, I would really suggest it because there's a lot. And when we jump into this section 2, you're gonna want to have heard this. But there's a song there called Father Time. So I've been a Kendrick fan, hip hop head, Kendrick fan for a long time. uh, on Father Time, he talks about this strained relationship with his father, how his father just had unreal expectations for him,
Yeah.
how his father taught him never to love, never to care for people, never to trust people. And that's wild to me because I've been listening to Kendrick's projects since before his first album came out, all the mixtapes and everything. He's never spoken ill of his father. And so when Kendrick says, take the mask off, on this album, he's also taking off his own mask of he's like, some of the things that my dad taught me, I knew were unhealthy. I've learned were unhealthy, not to trust people, to find my value in things that I did, to work myself to death. And I championed those things on all my last albums. On his last album, he had a song where he's talking about all I do is work, all I do is get it in. And he lifted those things up as if they were virtues when really they were vices.
Hey, bro. Let's me and you both be real. A lot of practices, because of how you and I both grew up in the
Yeah,
environments, a lot of things that we had to put in place to make it out of those environments, right? Later in life become detriments to our
Yep.
character.
Yep.
While we were in a situation, they were
They kept us alive.
they were advantages.
Yep.
They were things that put us ahead of the environment that we were in, that got us out, that kept
Yep.
us surviving, that helped us achieve. And those same things become detrimental to our further development. And that's hard. And that's a hard switch to say, this has always been something that I've relied on, that has helped me achieve, that got me awarded, that got me elevated
Yep.
in the culture and
Yep.
everything else. And now I'm realizing how unhealthy it was. But here's the deal: was it unhealthy then? That's what I'm unsure of, right?
Yeah. Man, that's
Was
a
it
good question.
was it
it unhealthy then?
was it unhealthy then, or was it necessary for survival? Your body needs a certain amount of calories every day, right?
Yeah.
And I remember being on mission trips, and I've told you about this, of having some of my mission trips having to live off of like jerky and craisins and like long term, like that's not what you want to be surviving off of.
Yeah.
But it was necessary in the environment that I was in.
The midwives in Egypt. If you're not familiar with scripture, children of a man named Israel come into Egypt, help save the entire country. Country's doing well. They're like, yay, let's go, Israelites. Hundreds of years pass. They're multiplying like jackrabbits, and they're doing really well. Another pharaoh comes up. He's like, hey, these guys might overthrow us. Looks like a certain colony in Virginia, very similar. But they're like, hey, these guys are doing too well, too good. We're gonna have to castrate all these people. So we're gonna have to get rid of all the young boys. If you got a boy that's born, throw them in the river, they dead. And you had one mother of an Israelite son who's like, man, this is a beautiful baby. And they put him in an ark, or as some people describe it, like a basket, but in an ark covered in pitch, and set him in the Nile River. The midwives find him. Now the law says the midwives are supposed to kill the baby. All throughout scripture, we see God say, hey, you should follow the laws of the land that are around.
Yeah.
The midwives disobeyed the law, but it was necessary in order for God's promise to come about.
Yeah.
There are sometimes situations in life that when we look at them through the lens of now, look like they were wrong then, but in actuality, they were necessary then.
And toxic now.
And toxic now.
Toxic
And
now.
toxic now.
And necessary, like, and so there's part of it where his father probably thought, I am building into my son what I believe he needs to survive and elevate himself out of the situations that we find ourselves in. You know what's made me, I have a hard journey with my father, who just passed this year. And what made me more graceful and seek reconciliation with my father is being a father myself. And recognizing my own mistakes and parenthood, and recognizing that most people do life the absolute best they know how, and but their own trauma that because this mental health thing and even paying attention to mental health is recent. It's recent, especially in the African American community. And most of our brothers and sisters, we both live in the Hi-Crest neighborhood. Most of our brothers and sisters still don't have access to mental health resources. That's one of the gaps that we're trying to close. And so we are a mental health desert. And so this whole deal of knowing toxic behavior, knowing, like, being able to call that out, even knowing how to deal with triggers from your past trauma, man, that is still so brand new. And so there's a recognition. You can recognize that something happened that was bad without demonizing the person, saying, I'm not saying what they did was right. And in a way, I have grown and matured enough to understand why they thought that was the right thing for me then. And that takes a lot of grace, man. But it's still it takes just as much grace for a mother whose son was killed in a mass shooting to say, I forgive the shooter. And we say, man, that's such a. But when it comes to toxic behavior that we've experienced, we have hard trouble doing the same.
And we often need help to see the trauma in our lives. There's a term that has come up recently, like within the last 3 or 4 years, called generational trauma. And generational trauma is when you are dealing with trauma that has been passed down. They say it's almost as if it's been passed down in your blood. Like it just exists within the culture around you. You're born into it, and it affects everything about the way that you live, the framing in which you place the world. And because generational trauma, it taints the waters that you swim in. You often by yourself won't see it. I used to always say this. I'm like, we don't know what our culture is until we know what our culture isn't. We don't really see the things that we do and that we see and that we take for granted that seem like this is just how the world works. That's culture. That is culture. That is the way you view and see the world. And until you see that someone else does this differently or someone else sees this differently, you don't see what you're doing as your culture. You just see it as life. And when you interact with other people who are now able to see and look into your life and go, why do you call that? Why do you do that way?
Water?
Why do you react this way?
What's water?
What's water?
The fish, you ask fish, hey man, how's the water feel? Like, what's water?
What is water?
They've been in water their whole life. Man, I was a foster parent. Now I'm an adoptive parent. And one of the things when we were going through training to become foster parents, they said, hey, a baby will experience the effects of trauma that a mom experiences before she's even pregnant. And so think about that. A baby will experience the effects of trauma that the mom experiences before she even got pregnant. And when you start thinking about that, that's that generational trauma that you're talking about. And so that it kind of destroys that bootstrap mentality also that we like to parade, because there are some things sometimes that are encoded, man, that you are having to deal with and you don't know why. And when we dismiss that for the time, we can't ever really start the healing process. And so here's where I want to go with this though. Like you said at the beginning, this is a double disc album, and I loved it because it's just kind of old school to me to have a double disc album. I remember my mom having a record player where we used to flip the records, so I love that. But you can tell there's a point in the album around track 10 where he starts the second session, and the music changes, and there's this freedom that he feels and how he expresses himself, and he's like, man, you know what? Forget Christianity, kind of thing. Like he's like, it's not like he is just dismissing God at all, but he's like, it's like he's exiting the faith in some ways. And man, we have a problem.
Yeah, yeah.
We have a problem because I'm wondering what have we done and what are we doing where people feel like they need to leave the faith to experience freedom.
Right.
Because that's not what was communicated in the scriptures. He said, "I came that you may have life and life more abundant." It's like human flourishing is a part of the scriptures. I mean, the heaviness that we are experiencing is not because of Christ. It's something that we're adding on to the faith, and a lot of it is, I feel, the easy answers that we like to give all the time. We like to give these easy answers and be so certain about every topic, and that certainty makes us stupid, and it causes everyone else to be burdened around us because in real life, we go back and we retreat and we say, well, my life does not fit into the easy answers that I've been given to check the boxes. And I'm not really all that certain on all these matters. Yeah. I've found that as I've grown in my faith, there are a lot few things that I am certain about. Yeah. And I just don't walk like that. Yeah. And I think where I wish somebody who's close to my brother could have and engage, where he didn't feel like he had to find that somewhere else. Where he could have found it in-house and said, brother, all these expectations that everyone has for you don't have to be. I went on vacation and then somebody said, man, I really love seeing your family on vacation, Jonathan, but I've never seen a pastor post pictures of them on vacation. I said, you know why? I said, because so many pastors are afraid that if people in the congregation or in general society see their family having fun, that they'll think that they're stealing money from the church, that they're taking too much of the money, that they're not helping people, that they don't really care about people, they're in it for the wrong reasons. And I just said, I had a successful career before I started ministry. And I just said, there's certain things that I'm not going to do, that if that's what it takes, I'm not going to do it. Yeah. And I said, I'm not going to live my life behind this wall hiding everything because I'm afraid of the opinions of every onlooker.
But here's the irony. Here's the irony of that, living your life behind the wall. I like the way you put that, because many of the things that we hold on to, that we try to pretend that we're certain about, often our certainty actually leads to insecurity.
Yes.
Just like with the mask, it's like, well, I got this mask on because I got to cover myself up, but now I got to keep the mask up. Yeah. And so like these very that's work. And so it's like this heaviness comes from, now I have to carry this thing that I've said I believe in because it makes me feel certain. And really what it does is it weakens us and we become less and less secure. And so what we end up doing is we start saying, I look and I'm like, man, with this project, I love how my man has shared his faith, how Kendrick has always been sharing his faith throughout these years. But the thing that I'm afraid of as he comes to this more individualistic kind of approach of, man, believing that I could save everybody burdened me. So now I'm just going to focus on me. I'm going to focus on me and mine. I'm going to run away from community. I'm going to focus on me and mine. We talk about this all the time.
Man, we are bipolar at times. Or a lot of times.
Yeah, yeah.
We swing from extreme to extreme. And you know why? Because it's so much harder. Like my wife said on the street that she grew up in, when she learned how to drive, there was these deep ruts in this country road. And if you just found your way into one of the ruts, then you didn't even have to steer the car anymore. It was just kind of steer itself down the road. And a lot of us are looking for easy buttons in life. We're looking for ruts in the road that we can just steer the car into and then let go of the wheel. Because it's a lot harder to stay between the lines. And so that's why we look so much for certainty. Yeah. It's because it's uncomfortable not being certain, because it takes more attention at the wheel of life when you're not certain, because you're steady having to navigate with nuance. But it's a lot easier to feel certain about this and then say, I can file that away. I never have to think about it. If it ever comes up, this is what I feel on it. I'm never going to change. Yep. But man, look here. Like, you're in a rut.
Yeah. You're actually in a rut.
You're actually in a rut.
You're actually in a rut. And you feel like you can trust the rut.
Until it blows out your tire.
Till it blows out your tire. And it's actually harming you the whole time, but you feel like you can trust the rut. And that's the reason why a lot of us want to be certain, is because we want something we can trust. And even though God has already told you, bro. I got all this covered. Christianity should never be about what we do. It should always be about the work that Christ has done. And often we're like, well, in order to be a Christian, I'm supposed to be saving the world. No, Christ has already saved the
Saving the
world.
world.
Christ is already saving the world. We get to enter into the work that he's doing, but we often don't really trust Christ to do his job. And so we feel like we have to do it for him. And then when we realize we can't, we go, well, Christianity just, it can't be the answer.
Here's the deal. When I ask a Christian, do they feel like the world is getting better or worse? How they answer that question a lot of times shows me who's the hero of their story. If you look at just the facts, the world is getting better. God is doing what he's promised that he would do. When people say the world is getting worse, what that means is, well, I've tried these things and tried to place myself as the hero, and I'm failing. And so therefore I feel like it's getting worse because I've attempted these things and I'm failing at playing a role that I'm not meant for. So forget it. And we end up where Kendrick ends the album, I Choose Me.
Yep.
Forget it. I'm a swing to this other pendulum, to this other extreme. I try to do all this other stuff, right? And then what it leads to is this. It leads to me ghostwriting for my cousin.
Baby King.
It leads to me ghostwriting to my cousin all the things that I don't really feel comfortable expressing myself, but I got to get out in some way. And so I ghostwrite.
Yeah.
And you know what? It's the same thing with this. If you don't, they say if you don't talk it out, you'll act it out. Yeah. And a lot of Christians, because they live behind the mask, they live behind the wall. People are wearing facades. And one, they are incredibly mentally burdened and emotionally burdened. But then they live ghostwriting lives. They have to section their lives off, and so they can't consume media in community. They can't really develop deep relationships because you can't always hold up the mask the deeper you go in a relationship.
Yep.
And so, man, I when I look at this album, I see those things.
It's the rut destroying your
I see, and it's from misplaced expectations. Charles Barkley said, I think it was the 90s, where he says, I am not a role model. And he was right and not he was right and wrong at the same time. What he was trying to communicate is that I shouldn't be the person that you model your life off of. And at the same time, and that's right, and at the same time he has to realize that the platform he has means that he is responsible, because in olden times, before we had laws, the way a culture developed its laws and customs was from the character of his heroes.
That's right.
And so in a certain place, when you have been blessed to have a certain platform or certain, there is something that comes with that. In the same way, like I said earlier, I wouldn't live behind a wall, but in the same way, because I am a pastor, I am a leader in my community, there is a certain responsibility for the way that I carry myself and the way I conduct myself in the public square. There is a responsibility. I can't go to the extreme of I can do whatever and there should be no judgment. Only God can judge me. That's not right. Because I asked the judge about that, and I just got introduced to a show 60 Days In that will tell you that other people than God can judge you. And I'm telling you, you don't want to be behind bars.
Right. No.
I ain't made for that life. And so other people then God, like Tupac was a good rapper, but he's a terrible lawyer.
Yeah.
And so
it's not an airtight case.
It's not an airtight case. And so that's another easy answer.
Yeah.
And so I just look at that, man. I feel where that's at. So here's my question.
Yeah.
Based on how this initial assessment of how these things hit us, first of all, where do you feel like this hits Southeast Topeka?
Man, I think this conversation, I would call this album a conversation between Kendrick and his fans, between Kendrick and his family, between Kendrick and his faith. I wouldn't say Kendrick and God, but Kendrick and his faith, and between Kendrick in the overall community. I think this conversation is a reflection of a conversation that a lot of us are really having in our hearts, and that we haven't felt empowered to have out loud. And often that's what art is for, right? Like artists will say things that we couldn't say.
Yeah.
They'll say the things that we couldn't say. That's why we relate to them. That's why we love their music. That's why we love their movies. That's why they say the things that we couldn't say or that we wanted to say and we wouldn't say. And so I think that this broader conversation of I've now taken on the weight of the world in whatever way that looks like, and I'm trying to live it out. And I'm finding that I'm failing, and it's leading me to some dangerous conclusions. It's something that's actually happening within our homes. There was a movie that came out by a Southeast Topeka local artist, Eric Fletcher. And it's called Dreams. It's really Hoop Dreams, but he took off the hoop. But it's like it's Dreams, and it was about a basketball player.
Yeah.
And the weight of the world really rested on the shoulders of this basketball player. It's like there's drug dealers. They're like, bro, if you can make it in basketball, then we can have a life and not have to deal drugs. Like, so we got to do that. The teacher's like, man, if you can make it in basketball, then my teaching career will be a success. If you can make it, and everything became to like he became a hero. He became the hero. And watching this 35-minute movie, although it was fun to watch, it was interesting, it was like, realistically, this makes no sense. And it's exactly how we live our lives. Man, if I can get to the right school, then my family will be out of poverty, and that'll change the world. Man, if I can be the best basketball player, if I can be the best rapper, and we're having these conversations to where we have become functional saviors, not only for ourselves, but for our communities. And my message to many of us is take it off.
Yeah.
Take it off. We cannot carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. Jesus Christ literally carried the future of human beings in his body, on his shoulders. And that same person instructed us to live in community with one another. He said, be like me. I lived in community, and I can actually carry the world on my shoulders. You can't.
Yeah.
You need community, and we need resources. Even though I disagree with where Kendrick landed at the end of this project, most of this project was informed by him going. He says it on the first album. First track. I went to therapy.
Yeah.
And he's like on the first track. He's like, he actually says in the first track, I was thinking about killing myself because I couldn't figure out. I had too many questions, not enough answers, and I felt like the only way to fix it was down a bottle of pills. And he's like, I needed someone to help me sort through what was going on so I could at least find some sort of other solution. And many of us are at a place where we need someone else. We need a community of people. We need resources of mental health to help us sort through some of the things that are happening. Just trying harder is nothing more than digging into the rut of being a functional savior.
Yeah, and so before you go to the resources, here's one of the things I want to add about how I think this hits. When I see neighborhoods like the traditionally redlined neighborhoods of Southeast Topeka, there's a lot of well-meaning people who want to see them take their next step and change, but they enter with paternalistic mindsets. And one of the things that they enter with preconceived notions of how it's going to go in a straight line from A to B, and that's just not how life change works. I think one of the most overlooked and underappreciated characteristics and qualities of God is perseverance.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm gonna continue praying for my brother Kendrick and hoping that those who are close to him that have influence on his life continue walking with him.
Yeah.
And I feel like when it comes to our neighborhoods, if you want to have the real conversation that begins the healing process, on the different topics that affect our neighborhood. It can't happen on your schedule, in your format, at the volume that you choose. Mm-hmm. Sometimes God had to be there for the weeping and the wailing of the people in their anguish. Yeah. And even if you look at the beginning of Exodus, Moses comes and proclaims, God proclaims these seven great I am statements and things that I will do for the people in the early parts of Exodus. But they said the people were so overwhelmed by grief that they were not able to receive the promises that God himself was delivering to them. And God understood that life situations were so heavy on them that they couldn't even accept the promises that he said, I'm going to redeem you, I'm going to develop a relationship with you, and I'm going to tell you what your destination is going to be. I'm going to give you a future of where you're going and this grand thing that you've always wanted. And the people could not receive the things that they wanted most: redemption from slavery, relationship with the God they never knew,
Right.
and a future, a hope. And he promised all these things, and it said that Moses said the people could not believe, they could not grasp it. And all they said was, Moses, since you showed up, our life has gotten harder. What we need is relief. And sometimes we have to understand that some of the things and circumstances and situations of someone's life are so hard that we are going to have to continue repeating in the midst of their tears, in the midst of our co-tears with their tears,
Yep.
what they're feeling before they'll ever believe it.
Yep.
And we just got to keep repeating it over and over again and stay present.
Yeah. Bro, if you don't get anything else from this, know that life is hard and God is good. I've got a friend, and I've gone through this same thing. Everybody that I know that has actually gone through taking medication for issues around mental health. I mean, even if it's ADD, ADHD, things like that, what they'll say when you're taking something that's like an antidepressant is that what generally happens is the things that you're taking it for, the side effects and the issues that you feel, whether they're paranoia, whether they're suicidal thoughts, when you first start taking medication, they actually skyrocket. They go up. Once you start addressing the problem, they actually go up. And the benefits from the medication are down here. And what typically happens is you get this type of thing that goes on, and then they get a point where they hit the middle, and then they veer off to where now you're starting to feel this stability. When you are walking with people or walking through situations yourself where you're stepping out of hard situations that you've been deeply entrenched in. I'm talking about generational poverty. I'm talking about physical abuse, abusive and toxic relationships, all of those types of things. When you're drug addiction, when you're walking through those things, it's going to get bad. And there are things, because we are people of pleasure, we will find ways to make our lives comfortable even if we're dying. And so in order to step into a space where we're actually living healthily, we have to take away all of the crutches, which means we're going to fall a lot. And if you are in that position and you are trying to make your way out of it, I want you to know it's okay to fall. Don't be embarrassed that you need the help and that you need people to come alongside you. Continue to walk. And if you are walking alongside people who are in situations that are trying to climb out from a deep place, expect them to fall.
A lot.
A lot. And make sure that you're not going it alone. I had a conversation with someone, they were like, hey, this person's in a bad situation. I want advice because I'm an elder here, one of the pastors here on staff. They're like, man, I just need some advice on how to handle this. And as I was getting off the phone with them, I was like, hey, also, did you talk to your husband about this? And they were like, oh, no. I'm like, in order to go and help this person, in order to lean in and help this person, even they don't care how healthy your boundaries you set, you're going to need other people to hold you accountable and to walk alongside of you because it's going to get bad. And if you try to go at it yourself, you will find yourself in a hard and dangerous situation. And so that's just one of those things that, like, man, when we work with, like, I lead the youth ministry here, and we work with kids that I've seen almost every one of our leaders at some point be like, man, I'm done. I'm ready to give up. I'm ready to give up. And it's hard for me because I'm like, man, you're just throwing kids away. You're just throwing kids away. But it's like when I look at those situations, I understand. And I'm like, man, if you need to move on, do that. And because it's hard work. Walking alongside people who are in hard situations, and you can't change and fix everything for them. But one thing it does too is as you lean in with them, what you start to see is you start to see this mirror held up to you where you start to realize some of the discomfort I have with this person it's not really because of them or even the situation they're in. It's because my life was secure enough that I was actually able to cover up some of the things in my own heart that I don't really like. And dealing with this person forces me to also engage myself in a way that I didn't have to do before. And so there can become this holistic trauma, but also on the other side of it is this holistic healing where now the people that you thought you were helping, God is actually also using to help you.
That's good stuff, brother. That's good stuff. And so here's the intersection. Here's the intersection we want to leave you with. It's one, as you consume the arts, media, do it in community.
Yes.
Do it with some other people who are mature, who you can bounce stuff off of. You can shop ideas through. You can float that. You can evaluate and filter it through. Right. Don't do it in isolation. Doing media, doing the arts in isolation is dangerous.
Yes.
That includes Christian media too, because not everything coming out of Christian media needs to be consumed.
Oh yeah.
The second one, mental health. I go see a therapist every other week. If you're here in Southeast Topeka, I want to recommend St. Topeka has mental health services here in the Hi-Crest neighborhood. You got Tyra Wallace, you got John Hyman, who's African American male. Tyra Wallace is African American female. You got Felicia Glass, who's African American female. You got places like Christ First. You got several organizations around. And if you need help with that, man, like come and see us, check us out. Stop by Fellowship Hi-Crest. Let us help you connect. Call Scent. That's one of the things they do is not just have a therapist there, but help you get connected with the right therapist that meets your needs.
And that number will be in the link. All of these resources we're sharing are going to be in the description of this video.
And then the last one is sometimes we need someone who's a little bit further along that swims in water, in the water that we're trying to get in, to help navigate those waters for us. And one of those for us is a guy named Ruslan who has a YouTube channel, who has a podcast that I listen to it on Apple Podcasts, and he's in the music industry. And so he helps when something like this comes out. Like he's one of the ones that I wait to hear some in perspective and different things of that nature. And it's just like having people like that is just like having a Bible commentary. Most of us found no problem with having Bible commentaries and Bible dictionaries, and they help us further study the Word of God. In the same way, when it comes to exegeting the culture, we ought to have some commentaries and some dictionaries that help us exegete the culture. And so those are the things that I want to leave you with today. I want to thank you for joining us for episode 1 of South by East, where we evaluate everything from culture to religion and all those things in between. Have a great day, and we'll see you on the next episode of the South by East podcast.
Thank you for tuning into the South by East podcast, where we meet you at the intersection of culture and community. Want to get the 411 on all the latest intersections? Join our public Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/South by